design, we would like to offer uh, a dual MTech, a dual BTech MS for our undergrad students, BTech in engineering and MS in computational mathematical economics, and also to start an MS PhD program in mathematical and computational economics. And this part of this AI, because today I think this data science and AI has reached all sciences. And as I was talking about, the entire agent-based formulation, multi-agent systems, what we talk about uh, in computer science, in AI, in control systems, many of those principles are today finding a parallel in economic theories and economic applications. And this synergy is something to be recognized, to be respected, and that in an IIT system should be nourished, and we should allow the students to really grow their interest in such areas. And I think if we can do that at IIT Jodhpur, and with the help of absolutely young faculty colleagues, they're just at the beginning of their career and they are very enthusiastic and just bubbling with energy. So we hope with their help, this would come up to be a really an active and effective research center globally. And with this wish, I wish this workshop. I think this is the second day. First day also, I heard that it was very exciting. This will be also very exciting and useful workshop. And this is, I think, only first step towards many such workshops in future. Thank you. And again, let me thank President Narahari and others who are here. And my respect to Narahari, because we have been we knowing each other for many years in various contexts. Thank you again to all of you.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. Now, so we will get started with the talks. We have two exciting talks planned for you. The first is by Professor Narahari. Professor Narahari, who is joining us from the Indian Institute of Sciences in Bangalore, is one of the world-renowned game theorists worldwide. He's currently the Dean, Division of Electrical, Electronics and Computer Sciences at Indian Institute of Sciences in Bangalore. The focus of his research has been in applying game theory, mechanism design, and machine learning to research problems at the interface of computer science and economics. In particular, he has worked in algorithmic game theory, design of auctions, electronic markets, computational social choice, social network analysis, online education, and digital agriculture, to name a few. So we are very honored that Professor Narahari is joining us today. He will be giving a talk on machine learning in mechanism design. So Professor Narahari, you can get started. The floor is yours.
Sure. So thank you, Professor Brahma, and thank you, Professor Shantanu Chaudhary, for your very nice introduction, actually. And thank you, Professor Datta, for inviting me here. And I wish this very young department all success in the future. And so let me get started. Let me share my screen. So the title of my talk is Blending Mechanism Design with Machine Learning. And I hope this topic will be appropriate for this workshop. I did think about what to talk in this workshop. So because it's a workshop on strategy, decision making, and analysis, and I thought mechanism design will be very appropriate. And because machine learning nowadays is everybody's talking about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and data science, I thought I will try to blend mechanism design with machine learning with some of the work that we have done in recent times. This talk would not have been given but for the involvement of a very large number of students and many of them currently happen to be faculty members in IITs and researchers in industrial research labs. So all that I'm presenting today is because of the work done by all of these students. Thanks to all of them. So let's try to see what is the kind of class of problems that we are trying to solve here. Imagine that you want to select a cost-effective, high-quality service provider for repetitive services. That is, you would like to get the services from this service provider for a very large number of times. So how do you do this is the question. An example could be that, for example, IIT Jodhpur may need to procure, let's say, event management services repeatedly for different events, because they would be conducting a large number of events, and they would like to sort of select an event managed service provider who offers the best quality service at the lowest cost. Usually what is done in government organizations is that there is a procurement process that goes on, and whoever bids the lowest will be selected as the winner. So it's called L1. So somebody who quotes, let's say, 40,000 rupees, 50,000 rupees, 60 and 80,000 rupees, the one who has quoted 40,000 rupees would be selected as the winner. However, if we want to select a high quality service provider, then we'll have to somehow combine quality with cost. Now, how do you combine quality with cost is a very interesting question. And oftentimes there is what is called as the techno-commercial evaluation, which will trade off quality and costs in a very nice way. So that, for example, if you find that the quality of the person with the bid 60 is the highest, maybe that person is going to be selected in this procurement process. Now, the question is that, when you are trying to learn the qualities fast and elicit honest bids, what you're trying to do here is that you're trying to minimize the cost. You're also trying to maximize the quality. In order to maximize the quality, you should know the quality of the service provider. Now, beforehand, you may not know the quality of the service provider. So you will have to learn the quality of the service provider. So you can see that if you really want to, trade off quality with cost, then what you should do is to learn the quality. So there is a machine learning problem there. And at the same time, you're now trying to minimize the cost. If you want to minimize the cost, then what you should do is to get truthful bids from all the service providers. So the question of getting truthful bids from all the service providers turns out to be a mechanism design problem. So you can see that, if you want to trade off quality with cost, then there is a machine learning problem. And at the same time, there is a mechanism design problem that you are trying to solve, right? Okay, so if you look at a more contemporary problem, for example, Facebook has these negotiating chatbots. Now, these chatbots could be representing companies, or they could be representing individuals trying to do some negotiation. And while doing negotiation, they also want to learn the preferences of the other company or the other agent or the other individual. So this is a situation where, you have AI chatbots which are learning the preferences of the other agents. And at the same time, they're trying to negotiate a deal. Now, negotiating a deal is more a game theoretic or a mechanism design problem, whereas learning the preferences is a machine learning problem. So if you want to now have a multi-agent system with negotiating chatbots, you can see that you have to solve a machine learning problem, which also involves mechanism design. So these are the two motivating examples I'm giving. There are many such examples. We're going to look at some of these examples in more detail later on. Internet advertising, for example, which all of you would be familiar with. So here, what happens is that you have advertisers, but you do not know the quality of the advertisers, or you do not know the click-through rate for the advertisers, which is their quality. And then you also would like to elicit honest bids from the advertisers. So there is actually a potential machine learning mechanism design problem in internet advertising. We have already seen just now in the procurement context that machine learning and mechanism design will have to be blended, and this kind of a situation occurs in many real world situations. For example, if you want to get investment advice on financial stocks, this is a problem that companies like Goldman Sachs routinely faces. Here again, you want to learn how the financial stocks are going to do, and then you want to also minimize your total spend. So it's a machine learning mechanism design problem. Infosys is interested in, for example, classifying a very large number of patents. That again turns out to be a mechanism design machine learning problem, because the patents are classified by experts. And these experts, you do not know the quality of these experts. At the same time, the experts could be very expensive. Similar problems are, for example, faced by Xerox in classifying legal documents, and HP in categorizing video clips. And finally, GE Healthcare has this problem of diagnosis and therapeutic advice, where clinicians or doctors or specialists could be involved. So when you're trying to procure these services, you're trying to trade off quality with cost, and potentially there is a mechanism design and machine learning, both the problems are involved. Okay, so with this as the motivating problems, our agenda today is to see how we can blend mechanism design with machine learning. And I will structure this talk into two parts. In the first part, I will tell you about mechanism design with some illustrative examples. And then in the second part, I will take you through some problems that need more both mechanism design and machine learning. And towards the end, we will look at the so-called multi-armed bandit mechanisms, where in an online learning problem, we will see how the manipulative behavior of strategic agents can be taken care of. Right. So this is in some sense the structure of my talk. I know that many of you may not have been exposed to either game theory or mechanism design or even machine learning. So I will try to be as gentle as possible in my presentation today. But if any of you has any question anytime, do not hesitate to disturb me immediately. Not a problem at all. Okay. So let me start with some examples from mechanism design. So what is mechanism design? All of you would have heard of game theory. So game theory deals with the analysis of games, whereas mechanism design deals with the design of games. To give you an example here, we have the all too familiar cake cutting problem here. This is a nice example which will tell us, what mechanism design is all about. So you have here a mother, and we call her the social planner, or we also call her the mechanism designer. And she has two kids, 1 and 2. And we have also said that these are rational and intelligent. By rational and intelligent, we mean that these kids have a certain utility function which they are trying to maximize. And then they're also intelligent. That is, they are capable of finding out what will maximize their utility and so on. So let me not get into more technical details than that. The problem here is very simple. So there is a cake here, and this cake has to be distributed equally between the two kids. Now, The simplest thing to do here would be to take a very good knife, and the mother, what she can do is to slice this cake into what she thinks are two equal portions, and then these two equal portions are given to the two kids. Now there is a potential problem. There is always a problem with this kind of a scheme. Why? Because each kid will go away with the feeling that the slice that he or she got is the smaller of the two slices. It will always happen. Howsoever, nicely the mother cuts the cake, and even if she takes the best knife in the world, the two kids will not be happy. So if you now want to, design a protocol which will make everybody happy here. Many of you may already know a solution to this. Now, the important thing is that this solution represents an outstanding example of a mechanism. So what is the mechanism here? The mother takes the knife, gives it to, let us say, kid 1, and tells the kid 1 to slice the cake into two pieces, and then tells kid 2 to pick up one of the two pieces. So you can see that kid 1 is slicing the cake, and kid 2 is picking up the first one of these two pieces first, and the other will go to the kid 1. Now, so the kid 1 being rational and intelligent, what does the kid 1 feel? He knows that kid 2 will pick up the larger of the two slices. So in order to prevent that, kid 1 will slice this cake into exactly two portions. I mean, exactly two equal portions. Then kid 2 will look at these two portions and pick up what he or she thinks is the larger of the two slices. So you can see that in this case, kid 1 is happy, kid 2 is happy, and of course the mother is also very, very happy. So this is a very simple example of what we call as a mechanism. So what is the mechanism here? There is a protocol that the social planner or the mechanism designer has imposed or has induced on the two players in the game here. In fact, what the social planner has done is to induce a game where the two players have some strategies. And using these strategies, the kids are able to, the protocol is able to come up with a solution which actually satisfies many important desirable properties of a mechanism. Now, this cake cutting problem, which happens to be a very nice example of mechanism design, may look to you very innocuous, but it can have far-reaching implications. So I am from Bangalore, and as you know, Bangalore is in Karnataka. And imagine that this cake here corresponds to the famous Kaveri River, Kaveri waters. And imagine that the first kid here is the Chief Minister of Karnataka, and the second kid here is the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. Because there is always a contention between the two states of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu as to how to distribute the river waters of the Kaveri River. And who is the mechanism designer here? Imagine that Shri Narendra Modi is the mechanism designer here. And Mr. Modi is now trying to solve this problem, Kaveri waters problem between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. And you can see how mechanism design offers a very nice solution to this problem. There are examples of many such problems. And I just want you to appreciate the fact that such an innocuous looking mechanism design problem can have far-reaching implications in the real world. So that's my first example of a mechanism design problem. Obviously, I have not gone into what's the game here, what are the strategies here, and so on. I hope you got an idea of what I'm trying to say here. Let me take the next example, which is a famous auction that was designed by William Vickrey. So William Vickrey got the Nobel Prize in 1996 for inventing this fantastic auction. Imagine, this is actually called as a second prize auction. Now, what is great about this second prize auction? It's a very simple mechanism. Imagine that there is an item for which there are 4 bidders, and assume that these bidders have bid 40, 50, 60, and 80. So they want to buy this item. So obviously, the auctioneer or the seller would like to maximize the returns, and the seller will basically, or the auctioneer will choose bidder 4 because the bid from the bidder 4 is the highest, which actually is equal to 80. So there is an auction called the first prize auction, where the winner is the highest bidder. In this case, the bidder with the bid is equal to 80. And then the winning bidder will actually pay an amount which is equal to the bid itself, which is equal to 80. So what happens is that in such a first prize auction, what is going to happen is that the bidders are going to be very conservative with their bids, because they know that they know that they're going to buy it. So they know that they are supposed to pay an amount equal to their bid. So they will be very conservative with their bids, and they will not bid their true valuations. What do we mean by true valuations here? For example, if 80 is the true valuation of this particular buyer, what it means is that this buyer is not willing to pay anything more than 80. So that is the value that this buyer is associating to that product. For example, there is a bicycle that you are trying to buy, and you may not be willing to give anything more than 1,000 rupees to that bicycle. So then so that 1,000 will then become the valuation, which is actually private information of this particular individual. So when this particular individual is now participating in an auction where a bicycle is being sold, then this person is not going to bid 1,000 rupees because he would like to buy it at something less than 1,000 rupees, which happens to be his valuation. So he may actually bid 800 rupees or 600 rupees or whatever, right? So this is what is called as the first prize auction. Now, let us say we want to design an auction where the bids which are placed by the bidders are actually equal to their valuations. That is, if my valuation is 1,000 rupees for the bicycle, right? Let us say my bid should be 1,000 rupees. Can I design such an auction? So William Vickrey basically showed that such an auction can be definitely designed, and all that he did was to change what is called as the payment rule. What William Vickrey said was, whoever bids the highest will get the object. However, the winning bidder will pay not the highest bid, not his bid, which in this case happens to be 80, but will pay the second highest bid, which is 60. So by defining the payment rule as the second highest bid, William Vickrey was able to show that such an auction mechanism will extract the true private information or the true valuations from the bidders as the actual bids. What is the reason? So the intuitive reason here is that the bidder knows that he or she is going to pay an amount which is somewhat less than the actual valuation. So will be very aggressive in bidding. And how much aggressive the bidding will be? So William Vickrey showed that if the difference, the difference that is going to be paid is 80 minus 60, right? Then he showed that bidding the true valuations happens to be a best response strategy, or what is called as a dominant strategy for the players. So this particular auction is called as a strategy proof auction or as a truthful auction, because it is able to extract the true private information as the bids from all the bidders. So for coming up with an auction and for rigorously proving that this auction satisfies the so-called property called dominant strategy incentive compatibility, so William Vickrey actually got the Nobel Prize in 1996. So again, it turns out that the Vickrey auction turns out to be an abstraction of many commercial auctions and many industrial auctions that are in vogue today. For example, if you're looking at the spectrum auctions where billions of dollars are involved, it turns out that the auction mechanism used is some kind of a variation, or it uses the conceptual ideas from the Vickrey auction. Okay, so you can also talk about a reverse auction for buying an item where, instead of selling an item, you're actually buying an item. So here the situation will be completely reverse. If the bids are 40, 50, 60, and 80, now the winner will be the one who has bid the lowest, because it's a procurement problem. It's a buying problem. So you can see that it's a buying problem where the bids are being done by the sellers. So the seller who has bid the lowest will be the winner, but the amount, the payment that the seller is going to receive is going to be the second lowest bid, which happens to be 50. It is exactly the reverse of the forward auction. This is the reverse auction. And this again satisfies the properties of truthful auctions. Okay, one can talk about the famous advertising auction of Google, which happens in the following way. So you have, let's say, a keyword on which you are doing a search using any search engine. And then on the left side, you will get a very large number of links here, whereas on the right side, you will get all the sponsored links. So these are links corresponding to certain advertisers or certain companies who would be connected with this particular keyword that you are searching for. So now it turns out that if the user who is actually searching for this keyword ends up clicking one of these slots, then it turns out that the company to which this advertisement corresponds to will pay a certain amount of money to Google. So you can see that what Google would like to do is Google would like advertisers to be displayed here, and Google would like the users to click as many advertisements as possible. And what Google would like to do is to display only those advertisements where the clicks are likely to be higher. So that is the advertising auction problem. Now, this is the most basic auction that is involved in search engines and most of these internet portals. It turns out that the kind of revenues that all of these companies make using auctions of some kind. So where is the auction here? The auction here is the following. The companies which want to be displayed here will actually bid on these positions, and based on the bid that they have placed, they will be either in the first position or in the second position, third position, and so on. The hope is that the advertiser who is in the first position will get the maximum number of clicks and so on. So you can see that there is an underlying auction here. And so if Google is able to design this auction properly, then the revenue that Google would get from this auction could be maximized. And it turns out that a very significant fraction of the revenues of many of these companies comes from auctions of this kind. maybe 60 to 70% of their revenue would come from auctions of various kinds. So you can see how mechanism design plays a very important role in in deciding the revenue of mega companies. Similarly, you have a crowdsourcing auction. So what's the crowdsourcing auction here? Crowdsourcing auction is exactly the reverse of an advertising auction. It's a procurement auction, where what you want to do is you have a bunch of crowd workers, and these crowd workers have certain costs. So this theta 1, theta 2, theta n are the costs. And what you want to do is you want to source these crowd workers using a certain mechanism. So what the crowdsourcer would like to do is to minimize the total cost of procurement. If you want to minimize the total cost of procurement, here again, you have a problem where you would like to design an auction that will maximize the social utility or the sum of the utilities of all the agents here, or would like to minimize the total cost and so on. So this is another example of a mechanisms which is very often used in the context of crowdsourcing. So we have seen several examples now. We have seen the example of cake cutting. Then we have seen the example of the Vickery auction, both the forward auction and the reverse auction. Then we have seen internet advertising and in crowdsourcing. So it turns out that in all of these, so these are examples of mechanism design problems. And it turns out that in all of these problems, there is also an underlying machine learning problem. For example, in the advertising auction, what the search engine would like to do is to maximize what is called the click-through rate of the advertisers. What do you mean by click-through rate? That is the probability with which a user is going to click an advertisement posted or displayed on the web, on the Google web page. So now, how does Google know the so-called click-through rate? Google does not know beforehand the click-through rate of these advertisers. So Google would like to learn the click-through rate of various advertisers. And what the Google would like to do is, then depending on how much that particular advertiser has bid, and also the click-through rate that is learned, then depending on that, a certain position here, first position or second position or third position, is allocated to that particular advertiser. So you can see that there is a machine learning problem here, where Google is trying to learn the click-through rates of the advertisers, and it is also trying to maximize its revenue. That's a mechanism design problem. But if the agents are strategic, the complication that could possibly arise here is that strategic agents may actually manipulate the learning algorithm itself. So there is a very interesting interaction that can possibly happen between the mechanism design problem and the machine learning problem, which actually makes the problem very interesting. And that is the kind of problems that we are interested in this talk. Similarly, when you look at the crowdsourcing auction, you have the crowd workers, and what you would like to do is you would like to engage with a crowd worker who has maximum quality. But then when you are conducting an auction, you're actually dealing with unknown entities. You're dealing with unknown crowd workers. You're dealing with crowd workers who have unknown, whose qualities are unknown to you. So what you had to do is, so even while you are trying to minimize the total cost of procurement, you also would like to learn the qualities of the various crowd workers. So here again, you can see that there is a mechanism design problem where you are trying to minimize the total cost of procurement, and you're also trying to maximize the quality of the crowd workers who are procured. Okay, so this is the kind of problems that we are interested in. So in mechanism design, what's the challenge that we are talking about? You're looking at problems that involve strategic agents, which I'm saying can manipulate algorithms in different ways. What do you mean by manipulation here? So these are agents which have a utility function, and they're always trying to maximize an expected value of their utility functions. Now, in trying to do so, what they would be doing is that there could be a conflict among the agents, because the utility function of one agent, when it is maximized, may lead to the, let's say, minimization or lowering the utility function of the other agents. So you can see that when the agents now interact, they could be playing a game against one another. And in trying to maximize an expected value of their utility function, they might be, for example, if their valuation is 1,000 rupees, one of the things, in order to maximize the utility function, they will not bid 1,000, but they may bid 900, right? So how do you ensure that this strategic play of the players is contained, is taken care of? And how do you ensure that desirable properties like truthfulness and other properties that we are going to talk about will be achieved? So in order to understand mechanism design correctly, the way to look at it is, how do we realize social goals in the presence of self-interested agents? So consider that you have a bunch of agents, and they're interacting with one another, and we want a certain social choice function to be maximized, or we want to achieve a certain social goal. But because these are all self-interested agents, then because of the game theoretic play by these self-interested agents, it may not be possible for us to maximize the social goal. So how do we make the agents behave in an honest way and also achieve the social goal in a given problem? Turns out to be quite a formidable problem. It is not an easy problem at all. And it turns out that mechanism design, which uses game theory embedded within it, provides very scientific answers to these questions. To understand what I mean by this, mechanism design does this by inducing a game among the players, so that when the players play out the game, then in a certain equilibrium of the game, the desired social choice function is implemented. That is, the social goal that we are talking about is realized in some equilibrium of the game. The immediate example that will come to our mind is the cake cutting example. So in the cake cutting example, the mother, who is the mechanism designer, came up with a protocol. And what does the protocol achieve? In an equilibrium of the underlying game which is played by the two agents, namely the two kids, it turns out that the social choice function, namely two equal portions of the cake being distributed to the two kids, is actually getting realized, right? So another way of describing mechanism design is to say it's the reverse engineering of games. That is, you want to design a game with a desirable behavior, so you will now design the protocol of interaction among the agents so that indeed that particular goal is realized. So this is what mechanism design is all about. Well, I mean, in the Vickrey auction example, one can show that one can show that because of the way the winner is decided and because of the way the payment is decided, all the bidders will actually bid their true valuations as the bids. So such a property is called as the dominant strategy incentive compatibility property. And here is a very simple proof of that. In the interest of time, I will not go through the proof. I'm going to make these slides available. I would like all of you to look at this very simple proof and try to understand this proof to see how truthful bidding turns out to be a dominant strategy for all the players in a weekly auction. Okay, so it turns out that when we want to design a mechanism, then there are certain properties, desirable properties, that we want the social choice function that we are realizing should satisfy. Now, a mechanism basically realizes a social choice function. Now, that social choice function must satisfy certain desirable properties. What are these desirable properties? One is, dominant strategy incentive compatibility, about which we have been talking about. This means that reporting truth is always a best. Hello, is there a question?
Uh, Professor, can I ask one clarificatory question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so are these properties of social choice function or the mechanism? Because the dominant strategy is that the game induced by the mechanism, that game is played with the dominant strategy. Could you please
Okay.
just
So the simple answer to that question is mechanism is identically equivalent to a social choice function. That's all.
So, sir,
A mechanism.
say in the auction example you gave,
Yeah.
second prize auction is the mechanism, right?
Second prize auction is the mechanism. The social
What is
choice
the
function, the social choice function that is implemented is basically a mapping which will allocate the item to the highest bidder, and also determines the payment as the second highest bid. And that can be
right?
very, that is the social choice function. So the social choice function there consists of two aspects. One is the winner determination, and the second one is the payment determination. So the collection of winner determination and the payment determination constitutes the social choice function there.
True. So, how can we, or like, is it correct to say that this winner determination and the payment structure is dominant strategy in second prize auction?
Yes, so because social choice functions are nothing but mechanisms. In fact, to be more precise, they are what are called as direct mechanisms or
Direct.
direct revelation mechanisms, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
direct revelation mechanisms are simply social choice functions. That is all. That is all. Right? So a direct mechanism is a mechanism where the agents simply announce their valuations. That is all. There is no bidding there. So whereas an auction is an indirect mechanism, right? In direct mechanisms, they only announce their valuations. And you can see that a social choice function is nothing but a direct revelation mechanism, right? So you don't have to, get confused at all. You can also say these are properties of a mechanism, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay. Thank you,
yes.
Professor.
Okay. So you have properties like dominant strategy, incentive compatibility. So this basically says reporting truth is always good. Reporting truth, as you know, is always good. It is our Satyameva Jayate principle, right? The famous principle of Satya Harishchandra and Mahatma Gandhi ji. So, and it's also a very simple strategy proof. It is called strategy proof because you don't have to do anything else. All that you have to do is to announce your true private value. That is, you have to announce the truth, right? If you announce the truth, you don't have to remember what you have announced because you know the truth. Whereas if you announce something which is not truthful, then what you have to do is you have to remember the untruth that you have spoken. And next time, what happens is that you will have to speak a second untruth to cover up for the first untruth. So you will have to now remember the first untruth followed by the second untruth. Third time when you get into a problem, you will have to now probably make one more untruth in order to cover up for the first untruth and the second untruth. And now you have to you have to remember all the three untruths and also the sequence in which you have told these untruths. So you can see how the strategic complexity gets absolutely messy if you are not truthful. So from that angle, dominant strategy incentive compatibility is a fantastic property that mechanisms can satisfy, but of course it's a very strong property to be satisfied. So you may like to relax this, and the relaxation is that see, in the case of dominant strategy incentive compatibility, reporting truth or bidding your true valuations is good for you, whatever the other agents are doing, whether or not the other agents are announcing their true valuations, it is actually good for you to report the truth. Whereas in the case of Bayesian incentive compatibility, it's much weaker. So announcing or bidding your true valuations is good for you whenever all other agents are also reporting their true values, right? It's much weaker. Now, there are other properties, allocative efficiency. You allocate items to those who value them most. That is what we are doing, in the second prize auction. In the second prize auction, you're actually allocating the item to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder also, because of the property of the auction, happens to be the person with the highest valuation. Similarly, there are properties like budget balance, where there is a perfect balance between the receipts and the payments in a market kind of a setting, in a two-sided market setting. And you would like mechanisms such that there is no dictator. That is, it should not happen that there is a single agent who is favored all the time. And you would like mechanisms to be individually rational. So here, players will participate voluntarily because they do not incur any losses. By participating in the mechanism, their utility is going to be greater than or equal to zero. So this is called individual rationality. Mechanism design is all about satisfying a subset or a maximal subset of these properties depending on the requirements of the setting there. So here is a diagram for you. Again, in the interest of time, I will not spend too much of this one on this. So there are several theorems which talk about different kinds of possibilities and impossibilities. And these are the famous theorems in mechanism design. And here is a diagram which will show you this is the space of all Bayesian incentive compatible mechanisms. And as a very special case of that, you have the dominant strategy incentive compatible mechanisms. And then you have mechanisms that satisfy different kinds of properties. Now, this is allocative efficiency. So you can see that you can have mechanisms which satisfy DSIC and allocative efficiency, DSIC but allocative efficiency, and so on. And you can actually superimpose the space of mechanisms that satisfy different kinds of properties. Here is the weak budget balance property. This is the strong budget balance property. And then you have the ex post efficiency as another property. And this is the individual rationality property. And you have the so-called Groves mechanisms which satisfy dominant strategy incentive compatibility and allocative efficiency. And you have different kinds of mechanisms called Meyerson auctions and so on. So I'm just showing this diagram to indicate to you the intricate interplay among the various properties that mechanisms can desirably satisfy. And you will always, as I said, look for a maximal subset of these properties to be satisfied by a given mechanism. So this is a brief about mechanism design. I will now go to the part 2 of this talk, where we will see how we need to blend machine learning and mechanism design. I will have a quick pause here and then invite any questions that you may have. And I also would like to know how much more time I have for my talk.
Yeah, Professor, you have another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, that includes the discussion, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So if
Professor,
there are, yes.
Just quickly, I'm interested to know like the results in the literature. So will these slides will be available to us?
Absolutely. So
Oh,
I'm going to, so all these slides will be available to you. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I'm going to email these slides, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to part 2 of this talk. I'll try to finish in the next 10 minutes or so that there'll be enough time for questions. Okay, so here is an important slide for you. What we are trying to do here is that you have a strategic agent here. The strategic agent here has private information theta1. For example, it could be the valuation. Valuation means for example, in the case of selling, the amount beyond which I am not willing to buy that particular object. And then in the case of procurement, for example, when a seller is in the case of a seller, the valuation is the amount below which the seller would not like to sell. So that is my theta1. So this is what I'm trying to extract in an auction or in a mechanism. This is the value that I'm trying to extract. It may not always be possible. Whereas let us say that there is a parameter Q1 which is observable. So an agent has some private information theta1 which cannot be observed, but has a connected parameter that can be observed Q1. In some sense, if you are able to observe this parameter Q1, you will get an indirect picture of theta1, let us say, right? Theta1 cannot be, is not observable, but Q1 is, okay? Now, suppose there is a learning algorithm to learn Q1. For example, Q1 could correspond to the quality of a crowdsourcing worker, right? Now, if you want to learn the quality of the worker. So suppose you are using a learning algorithm. So let's say you're using a black box learning algorithm to learn this parameter Q1. But suppose the strategic agent knows this learning algorithm, right? More often than not, agents will know what kind of learning algorithms are being used, right? So then what the agent can do is to misreport theta1. So misreport theta1 means, suppose the agent is doing some bidding. For example, the crowd worker is trying to, bid the cost of service. So the crowd worker can actually misreport it. Now, the misreport can happen because there is a utility function that the crowd worker is trying to maximize. And in order to maximize that utility function, truthful bidding may not be the best response strategy. However, here the agent is more manipulative also. What the agent is trying to do is trying to misreport so that the learning algorithm is manipulated. What do you mean by the learning algorithm is manipulated? For example, by misreporting the quality, the crowd worker may ensure that the learning algorithm will always, the auction mechanism will always select that particular agent. So there are certain very interesting ways in which the agent might be able to manipulate the learning algorithm. By saying manipulate the learning algorithm, what I mean is that the learning algorithm works incorrectly, or it works correctly but takes a long time to work, right? So now in such a situation, now the question is, can we use mechanism design to make the learning algorithm work correctly and also run faster? This is a central question underlying the interaction between the mechanism design that you are doing and the machine learning algorithm. And as we have observed, this can be nicely illustrated using what is called as the multi-armed bandit problem. Now, the multi-armed bandit problem essentially represents an online learning problem. So there are k arms, right? I have given here the picture of, all of you will know whose picture this one is. So there are 20 arms here. But in general, in a multi-armed bandit problem, there are k arms. And these arms will produce unknown rewards. These are stochastic rewards with a fixed but unknown distribution, right? And so what you have to do is, you have to select the arms to be pulled. At every point of time, you're pulling either one arm or a subset of arms. So you have to basically pull the arms in such a way that the reward that is generated, you can see these rewards are stochastic. The rewards that are generated are maximized in the long run. So basically what you do in a multi-armed bandit problem is to do an exploration and an exploitation, because you need to do exploration because you want to find out, what is the mean reward that is being produced by a particular arm. And then once you have a decent idea about that, maybe you will decide to sort of keep on pulling that particular arm. So the arm that you are going to pull is a very important decision in the multi-armed bandit problem, and it's a quintessential online machine learning problem. It's a very nice abstraction for online learning. So you are selecting arms to be pulled in each round to maximize total expected reward in T rounds, right? So if you have a multi-armed bandit online learning algorithm, right? And so you can see that there are these multi-armed bandit problems, which are online learning problems. And then we have these mechanism design problems where you're trying to design mechanisms. But if it happens that the arms in the multi-armed bandit problem are held by strategic agents, so then you can see there is also a reporting that the agents do. And if you now want to design algorithms for such multi-armed bandit problems, so then those algorithms become the so-called multi-armed bandit mechanisms, right? So we are looking at the interface of mechanism design and online learning here. And such problems arise pretty much in the examples that we are already familiar with. For example, in the case of an internet advertising, what are the arms? The various arms are advertisers, right? And then what you want to do is, at a given point of time, you may like to display certain advertisements. So you have to basically pull a subset of arms. Question is, which subset of arms are you going to fill? Now, the stochastic rewards here are the click probabilities. That is, each advertiser has a certain click probability with which a typical user is going to click an advertisement of that particular company. So these click probabilities, which are unknown, right? These are stochastic. And the search engine is now trying to learn these click probabilities. And what is the private information here? Private information here is the valuation of a click. That is when a user clicks a particular advertisement, what is the value that the advertiser is going to derive from that? And this valuation is going to be used by the advertiser in order to do the bidding for different slots in the advertising auction. So now, what is the map mechanism here? So the map mechanism essentially here is a mechanism which will ensure that all the advertisers are truthful. That is, they are going to bid their true valuations, right? And it should induce true valuation by all the advertisers. At the same time, the mechanism should also learn the click probabilities of the various advertisers. Now, if the advertisers know the learning algorithm using which their click probabilities are being computed, so then the advertisers also could use a bidding strategy which will slow down the rate at which the learning algorithm works, or the learning algorithm itself could be manipulated, right? So I'm just giving a high level idea of what is happening here. A similar thing happens in a crowdsourcing auction, where the arms are represented by the crowd workers whose qualities are unknown, and we are now trying to learn the qualities of these crowd workers. And we are also trying to truthfully elicit the cost per service of the crowd workers so that we can minimize the total cost of service. So you can see there's a nice interaction here between the quality and the cost here. And here again, you will see that you have to design a mechanism which will take into account at the same time, you have to also learn the quality of these crowd workers. So this is where machine learning and mechanism design interact. And you can see that, we have looked at a variety of problems under multi-arm bandit mechanisms. We have looked at multi-arm bandit mechanisms with budget constraints, for example. We have looked at map auctions with multiple parameters. Then we have looked at combinatorial map mechanisms. We have also looked at sleeping bandit mechanisms, Thompson sampling based map mechanisms, and so on. So these are some research directions that we pursued, where we were able to see the interactions that are happening between machine learning and mechanism design, and where we were able to come up with mechanisms that satisfy the desired properties. Now, I will not bore you any further. What is that there are several problems which are waiting to be solved here. In map mechanisms, one can look at a variety of different types of multi-bandit problems. And what we can also look at is how deep learning, active learning, interact with mechanism design. And there are various domains like cybersecurity, blockchain, smart grids, online education, healthcare, in addition to internet advertising, then crowdsourcing, and so on, where this interaction between machine learning and mechanism design could be really leveraged. Okay, so let me now summarize my talk. What we have learned is that mechanism design is at the heart of designing robust solutions to AI problems involving strategic agents. And we have seen how mechanism design is able to come up with these solutions and the different properties that mechanisms should be satisfying. And most of these AI problems involve learning, but the learning algorithms could be manipulated by the strategic agents. What we are trying to do is that future AI applications must blend machine learning with mechanism design for getting principal solutions. If you go back to the example of the negotiating chatbots, that's an excellent example of a current futuristic application where you have a bunch of chatbots which are representing individuals or companies or organizations, and they're trying to learn the references of the other chatbots, and they're also trying to negotiate so that there is convergence in the allocation that finally happens. So that would be a grand challenge problem that one can solve using machine learning and the mechanism design. So there's a book on game theory and mechanism design that this is a small commercial from my side. So buy this book. It's a very nicely written textbook, and there are numerous examples at various points of time. The game theorists and mechanism designers who have played a very influential role, their contributions have been brought out in this book. And so if you are more familiar with Chinese rather than English, then there is a Chinese version of this book. You can actually buy the Chinese version if you are more familiar with Chinese. And if you have any questions, you can find all answers in this book. Thank you very much. I will be very happy to take questions now. And I don't know how much time we have. We have at least about 5 minutes time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you so much, so Narahari. That was a very insightful talk. So the floor is now open to the audience. You can unmute yourself and ask questions.
Yeah, is Aditya trying to ask a question?
So if there are no questions, then I may like to ask some questions to the audience. So I want to know from the audience, if this talk made any sense, Is there somebody who did not understand anything from this talk? You can raise your hand. Okay, so I'll ask the reverse question now. Yes. Okay.
Okay, so I have a like very silly question might be. So as you have explained that multi-arm bandit problems, so those can be solved by machine learning problem. So so I'm not able to connect the dots between the properties of social determination function and the multi-arm bandit problem. So suppose there is an agent who is learning through experimenting or exploring in the multi-arm game. So what it is learning, or what it is learning, the social determination function or something else?
So let us take the example of internet advertising. So the internet advertising can be modeled as a multi-armed bandit problem, where the arms are the advertisers, right? And the learning parameter there is the click-through rate, right? And there is also a mechanism there. What is the mechanism? The mechanism is the one which is derived by, which is designed by Google. What does Google try to do? Google will try to maximize the revenue that is obtained from an internet advertising auction, right? So what's the revenue that Google will get? It is the total amount of time that the total amount of money that the advertisers are going to pay over a certain time period. Let us say you're looking at a 1 hour time horizon. So in this 1 hour, there may be millions of searches. In these millions of searches, what will happen is there are advertisers for each one of these searches. And then there are also a very large number of users. The users are clicking those slots, and then a certain amount of money will accrue to Google. So over a 1 hour time horizon, Google is now trying to maximize its expected revenue. Now, if it wants to maximize its expected revenue, then it is through an auction that is doing. What is the auction here? So every advertiser is going to bid a certain amount of right, corresponding to a particular slot, right? And based on the amount that is bid by the advertiser will get the first slot or the second slot or the third slot or no slot. So there is an allocation problem here. What is the allocation problem here? The slots. And what is the payment problem here? The amount of money that an advertiser will pay to Google whenever a user is clicking. Fine. So you can see that there is a selling auction here. The Google search engine is basically selling the advertising slots here and trying to maximize its revenue out of it. Its revenue will be maximized, right, if there are maximum number of clicks. So it must maximize the click-through rates of the advertisers who are displayed. Now, Google does not know, right, the click-through rates of the different advertisers. There is a large number of advertisers. Google would not know. So what Google has to do is to actually learn the click-through rates of these advertisers. So there is a learning process that is going on, right? Even as there is an auction that is also ongoing, where Google is now trying to elicit truthful bids from all the advertisers. Are you able to see the connection now? And this is a multi-arm bandit problem, because each time an arm is pulled, that is, each time a reward that comes, the reward is actually tied up with the click-through rate of the advertiser, which is unknown to Google, right?
Yes, thanks for
Is the
this.
fine,
Thank you.
Kamaledu?
We have a few more minutes until we start with the next speaker. So the floor is still open to the audience members. If any of you have a question, please feel free to ask.
I would like all those of you who have actually done a course on game theory already, you can maybe raise your hands.
Sir, just one probably unrelated question. So currently I'm trying to read the literature on mechanism design with evidences. So starting work that started with Lafo and Green, and then Pora et al. And so on. So is there any relation between these mechanism design with evidence and mechanism design with machine learning? Is there any relation between these two?
I'm really not sure. There may be some relationship between the two, right? So maybe I will go through more carefully what exactly happens in mechanism design with evidence, right? See, in mechanism design with machine learning, there is a certain parameter that you are trying to learn, and this parameter could affect the way the bidding is done by the players, right? So I do not know what exactly happens in mechanism design with evidence, right? So if you can point me to some papers which talk about mechanism design with evidence, I'll be very happy to look at the papers and then tell you the exact connection.
So I can share the paper with you later on, but it's something like individual agents. So for example, there's this principal agent problem with the usual problem of agents, principal not knowing what agent actually going to report. So agent can give some evidence of her type, of his or her type. So that might help make decision from the point of view of the principal.
Okay, fine. Okay, so perhaps the process of collecting the evidence or giving the evidence probably can be cast as maybe a learning algorithm. I'm not sure, right? And if that is so, then I think there is definitely a connection.
Okay, so thank you, sir. I will share the papers with you.
Yeah. So one thing is in some sense, the knowledge of the principal agent is, increasing with time, with more evidence being gathered, right?
Yeah.
So I think it can be cast as a machine learning problem, right? So, but again, I do not want to say anything very definitive there, right? I'll be very happy to look at any papers that you may like to point me to, and then I'll be happy to look at it. And then
sure, sir. Thank you.
Sir, hello, sir. I just have a very short question.
Sure.
Sir, very small question on the first slide on machine learning, which you had shown, in which you were saying that the designer does not know the exact parameter of the agent, but he knows some other parameter which is connected to the main parameter.
Yes.
So for that slide, can you just please tell a reference where we can learn that in more detail?
Okay. We're talking about this slide. Let me see. This one, right?
Yes, sir.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to give you a reference. But I hope you have understood what I'm trying to say here, right?
Yes, sir.
So theta1 is the private information, and the Q1 is some parameter which will give perhaps some idea about theta1. For example, if the quality of a crowd worker is very high, the cost also may be very high. Right. So Q1 may indirectly tell you what theta1 is, and you're actually trying to you're actually trying to learn Q1, and theta1 could correspond to the cost of the service provider, right? So you can see that there could be an interesting relationship between these two, but the learning process is the one which will concentrate on Q1, because theta1 itself is not observable. And now the mechanism design comes into picture here, because you are now trying to elicit theta1 truthfully, right?
Right. Yes, sir.
Got it? Yeah.
So, sir, any book where we can learn this in more detail?
Absolutely. We have a survey paper on multi-armed bandit mechanisms, and that survey paper is right here. Let me see. So there is this survey paper that we wrote, Shweta Jain, Satya, Ganesh, Divya, and myself, Mechanisms with Learning in Stochastic Multi-Armed Bandit Problems. It can be downloaded from my webpage. It appeared in the Indian Journal of Pure and Applied Mathematics, right? And if you want to know more about the multi-arm bandit problem itself, so there are n number of references, but this is an excellent survey by Bubeck and Cisa Bianchi. Regret analysis of stochastic and non-stochastic multi-arm bandit problems.
Okay,
So
right.
I'm going to make all these slides available.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
So maybe I'll stop sharing now.
Are there any more questions for Professor Narahari? Well, if there are no more questions, thank you so much, Professor Narahari, for taking time out on a Sunday evening and your delightful talk. We really had a very good time learning about mechanism design and machine learning. So before we start the next talk, maybe we can take a short break of a couple of minutes. We'll start the next talk at 7:25.
So thank you very much. All the very best.
Thank you, Professor Narahari. Hi, Badri. How are you doing?
Yeah, hi, Dipavati. I'm good. How are you? Good evening. Hey, Devasidi. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Long time. How are you? Yes.
Yeah, hi, Badri. This is Ruhi Sonal. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Rohi. Yeah, nice to see you.
Hello, Professor Mukherjee. This is Ruhi.
Hi.
Hello, Badri.
Hello.
Professor Mukherjee. This is Abhinav. Nice
Hi,
to meet you.
Abhinav.
Hello. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
I'll just get some tea for myself and be back.
Yeah. So
Badri, looking forward to your exciting talk.
Yeah, thanks, Devasidi. Yeah.
I sent you some text, but just ignore it. I also said ignore it,
Oh, okay. I haven't
because
seen actually.
people called me and, saying, but there was some misunderstanding or something, I believe, about
Okay.
the time. But ignore my texts.
Oh, I haven't seen actually.
Yeah, sorry. I thought it's really early, in
Yeah.
Seattle.
Yeah, it's early in Seattle. Gosh.
Yeah, actually, the problem was my alarm didn't work, so I woke up instinctively. I don't know how. Somehow the alarm didn't work actually. So that's the reason.
It happens with me, sometimes on the most important days. But today also, actually, my alarm didn't work, and it's Sunday, right? I mean, you want to sleep late, but my body clock somehow woke me up. I think, thankfully.
Yeah.
And
Same here actually. Exactly, just a minute before.
Exactly, the body
time I
clock.
woke up. Yeah.
And actually, my daughter kicked me. She was sleeping with me. She kicked me in the morning as usual. So it was a good thing, It was, in a way, it was a good thing.
Right. I hope she's doing well.
She is. How about Anaha?
Yeah, she's also fine now.
And her brother? Her brother is doing well?
Yeah.
I haven't seen him. Need to see him one day.
They're going very fast. Yeah.
I know.
So I think we can get started. So thank you all for joining us. So our next speaker today is Dr. Badri N. Gopalakrishnan. Dr. Gopalakrishnan, who is joining us from Seattle today, is the founder and director of Infinite Sum Modeling. It's a leading economic modeling firm providing advice to a wide range of clients, including several governments, non-governmental organizations, private companies, and even multilateral organizations. So Badri has numerous publications spanning across several topics, ranging from international trade, agriculture, food policy, industrial policy, health, labor, even energy, environment, and many more. He is associated in various capacities with several think tanks across the globe. Personally, I know Badri as an economist who wears many hats and who not only wears many hats but also traverses the worlds of academia, industry, and think tanks equally efficiently. And that's a rare skill that very few economists have managed to master. So we are delighted that Badri is joining us today. He will be talking about machine learning in business decision making. So thank you so much for joining us, Badri, and the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vibhuti, and I'm very glad to be here. And in fact, I should also thank Dr. Devashri Mukherjee for introducing us, and that's how we were able to meet and have this discussion. So I'm very happy to be part of this, and I hope you can see my screen, the slide.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to keep this presentation relatively non-technical and short. The presentation itself will be short, but I'll be talking a little more. So my idea is to first give a brief introduction about some practical aspects of machine learning, as I understand as a non-specialist in the field. Who uses machine learning from time to time, but not an expert in that. So from that point of view, I will give a brief introduction, which may sound very naive compared to the detailed technical discussions that may have already happened in the workshop. So just to kind of give a high-level overview, and then I will jump into some examples how machine learning can be used for business decision making, and some examples would be very generic, based on what has happened in the literature, what have other people done, and some examples would be based on our work in inference modeling, what we have done over the years. So that would be the broad idea of this presentation. And at any point of time, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to stop me. So this is how I think of machine learning at a high level. So it basically it's a method, or it's a technique that that basically builds automatically developing systems that can learn and improve from experience. So as much information is fed to the system, it's going to be as much accurate and efficient and so on. So more and more learning would lead to better performance, and there is no explicit programming involved. Of course, practically speaking, you're going to program the machine learning algorithms and so on, but you don't have to explicitly program how to improve it over time. So the learning happens, the more training data goes in, the learning happens and the improvement happens automatically. So that's the idea that I have. And it's quite common to understand machine learning as a proper subset of artificial intelligence. Of course, artificial intelligence is much more. There are many more things there. One example is like, AI can be thought of as something that can also do logical inferences, symbolic reasoning, and so on. But machine learning typically doesn't involve these things, although I think some of the recent developments have started doing that. But then the moment you do that, then you definitely start calling it AI. And also there has been some development the academia, particularly and also in industry to some extent, to overcome the major criticism against all the data-driven research and analytics, which is that yes, you can be accurate, you can be precise, you can be like efficient, you can predict things spot on, but what about explainability? If somebody says, okay, you are I understand that your model is great, and you forecast that. Let's say we are using machine learning to forecast the GDP of India, and it says GDP is going to be 7% per next year, 8% the year after, and so on. Okay, I understand. I get that you are predicting it based on a wide range of information that is available now, but can you pinpoint as to why it has to be the number that you provide? What are the reasons why the growth is going to be 7% and not 8% or 6% or 4% or 5%? And that question cannot be easily answered in traditional systems. So for that, there has been some new methods that are coming up in AI. So we call them explainable AI. So of course the purpose of my presentation is not to get into those details, but just I wanted to mention to all of you and people in general who are working on machine learning AI, it will be a nice idea to think about these questions that have been posed by specialists in different fields, right? So this question that I just asked about the economic forecasting, it's a pretty common question that any economist would pose. Okay, what if, what's the big deal if your model is great and it will predict, if you cannot actually explain why why something is happening, why is GDP increasing or decreasing in the next year or two? How are you incorporating qualitative aspects there, and how are you incorporating uncertainty there? All kinds of things, and more importantly, all these things, uncertainty, even qualitative aspects, that there may be ways to include them, but how to explain them? One way to explain them, even without going into some high level, some advanced methods, could be to look at the different features in the model and see how each feature is contributing to the particular forecast, and say that, okay, this is why. You can probably explain that this part of if it is 7% is the growth rate, 1% is coming from this, 1% is coming from this, and so on. That is always possible, but then even beyond that you cannot go. Beyond that you cannot say, okay, why do you expect that feature to go up or down, and so on. So there is no end to that. But the idea is that as a machine learning expert or a machine learning practitioner, one has to keep this in mind, how to take into account the practical aspects and also theoretical aspects of a particular domain that you are working on using ML for, and that is something the field has been trying to take this into account, and this is the broad trade-off between complete dependence on data and complete dependence on logic and theoretically rich structure of a model. So that's I forgot, a few years ago there was a pretty detailed article in one of the popular newspapers. I forgot which one was it, but it was all about this topic, the trade-off between data and structural thinking, completely relying on data, which is basically how data science, machine learning, all these things are going on, and a structural model, structural thinking kind of framework, where you have a series of equations, you have a system of let's say equations or like behavioral aspects, that say, okay, this leads to this, this leads to this leads to this, and so on. And then each of them, each variable can be like a feature as well as the forecasted variable, and then you have a system of equations. So that is what you can think of as system of equations. In economics, we call it like simultaneous equation systems, or in simple mathematical terms, you can call it like a system of equations, just a system of linear system of equations or non-linear system of equations. So these are traditionally used as structural frameworks where you have a clear story with or without data. Sometimes you can even do them without data. You can have a system of equations, you can solve them, and you can solve for each variable, and you can tell a lot of story about each variable. Why is this variable different on this variable? What could be the potential impact, positive or negative, of each feature on each different variable, and so on. So that is the other extreme, where you completely have a very rich theory, whether it is economic theory or some kind of engineering, mechanical engineering theory, or whatever. And on the other hand, you have just you have a machine learning system where you keep adding features to improve the performance. You keep adding parameters or reducing parameters, and so on. So that is the other extreme. So this extreme, where you have pure machine learning model, you're going to have probably good performance of the model, but you cannot explain it much. On the other hand, you have the beautiful model that can structurally explain everything, but you don't have, either you don't have any data, or you don't have enough data to come up with accurate results. So that's the big trade-off. I usually work on the second type of models, and occasionally work on machine learning type of models. So I myself can clearly see this trade-off. And in fact, in one project we did for, I'll talk about it briefly later, I ended up using both because I was able to use machine learning for making sure that we get like a precise or accurate forecast based on the in-sample forecasting. We first saw within the sample how the model is performing. Machine learning model was obviously performing well, but the economic model, the economic structural model that I used separately, that I was able to get a lot of nice explanations. Okay, this is why this is happening. But I actually ended up using both. I used the first model to forecast and second model to explain. That's one thing some of you can think about in the future. So yeah, that's the broad high level thing. Now getting a little more into the classification of machine learning methods and so on, which people must be already familiar in this workshop. But just a kind of a recap, you have at least three different types of learning. I mean, there are many more, but you can think of these as some broad categories. So supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. So we'll discuss these things in some detail. So in terms of supervised learning, it's more about classification and regression. So the categories, certain categories into which you are classifying the data, and then you're running the regression. So it's basically like a predetermined. You're kind of supervising the learning in the sense you tell the algorithm that these are going to be the categories. Like you can think of you have data on some education of children, and there you have the age group can be like a category, like kids aged 4 to 6 is one group, 7 to 9 is another, and so on. So that's something you are telling a model, or you can think of a data set on consumption, and you have people within different income categories, poor, rich, rural, urban, rural, poor, urban, poor, rural, rich, urban, rich, and so on. And you define what is poor, what is rich, right? So that is supervised. Unsupervised is more like you let the algorithm decide the clusters or the categories. The algorithm is going to tell you what are the categories, and that is done by dimensionality reduction. So you have so here you can actually and I've always thought about this as an economist when I do some economic research. We always come up with this thing called dummy variable approach, where you classify a particular. It can be thought of in two ways. You have a continuous variable, and you want to classify that into different categories. And typically, we just at least in some of my papers, I may have one regression with the continuous variable, and another regression I may just classify that into multiple groups. The simplest way to do it would be, okay, let that variable be like let's say let's say income of a household. So I may just say, okay, I don't want all these details of income. I just want to know if somebody is rich or poor. So there'll be a dummy that says one if that particular household is rich according to some definition that I impose to the model, and then I'll run the model. So then I'll say, okay, rich people are going to behave in this way. So then the question could be like, how do you define rich? And obviously, I'll have some standard metrics. I'll probably use some poverty line or whatever. But I always thought it would be more elegant if the model itself can derive that, and derive based on the sample that you have. It can come up with some ways to divide the whole thing into two groups, rich and poor, and not by any externally imposed threshold. So that is something that unsupervised learning can do. And then you have reinforcement learning that we'll talk about later. So thinking about some practical applications. These are not in any way anything that I or my team did, but just some generic examples. So first thing could be to for the policymakers, it can be about tax evasion. Using machine learning, they can find looking at the patterns. So this is not even about forecasting, it's about just the existing data. From the past data, I can do that. Detecting fraud can also be for industries, not only for the government. For example, we all buy a lot of things in Amazon Prime or Flipkart, and they're pretty generous when it comes to return. If you don't like something, you can return them. I know that they do have some internal algorithms, machine learning based and economic modeling based, which actually can identify specific customers who have the habit of returning on a regular basis without any reason, which is basically like some free consumption. They purchase something, consume for some time, and then return. They just take advantage of the free return policy. So obviously, at the moment, these companies may not be doing a lot to stop that, because that is one of their strengths. They want to keep their customer service very generous, but they are noting this, and at some point they may do something. They may come up with some methods, and they've already been doing something about it, to basically sometimes not accepting returns or making the return policy a little more difficult or stringent, and so on. So that could be another example here. The second example is about chatbots and virtual assistants, where you're actually getting into a little bit of AI domain here, but basically it's about like we see a lot of chatbots nowadays. Many companies, they have, if you open their website, they'll automatically some virtual assistant ask you what you want, what you're looking for. They may even learn what you have been searching on the website, and they can just continue with it. May help you establish that. And for a person, for a user who has no idea about these algorithms, they'll be super impressed. They'll think, oh my God, they're just reading my mind. I don't know how they found it. So, and maybe some people may even get, excited in the wrong way. And they think, oh, I have no privacy here. So, but anyway, so that's another thing, virtual assistant, which can actually respond to what you're asking for. Like in a sense, what you're asking is like a feature, and that is going into the system and then triggering the machine learning algorithm to work, and then you get some outcome from there. So it's a little unstructured data and text related machine learning. Then of course there are even more serious applications like health applications, diagnosis. We did a little bit of work on this. I'll come to that later. But yeah, in the literature, and as I'll show later, there is even a pretty impressive development that can help in early diagnosis of major health ailments like tumors and so on. And of course, deep learning is another main driver for recent advances. There is a book which I would suggest many people to look at. It's actually about the historical perspective of deep learning, how deep learning evolved as a subject, and how over time there was like kind of tension between the traditional way of AI, where AI was actually a very structural kind of approach, not structural, I would say, like a very systematic approach, and there was not a lot of non-linear thinking and convoluted layers and so on, layers of thinking and so on. And deep learning, the book's name is The Deep Learning Revolution by Terence Sejnowski, who is really a pioneer in this area. I would recommend all of you to read it, because this actually shows how two things I learned from this book. First thing is how it takes a long time to change the course of thinking. Although like whatever somebody is talking about could be like fundamentally new and fundamentally much better than what exists before, it takes a lot of time, a lot of push to happen. That is one thing, and that is a story of deep learning. So deep learning, neural networks and so on, they actually started. The discussions on them began as early as 1940s, 50s, 60s, but they were kind of sidelined by the standard researchers, not because of any particular it's not about any prejudice or bias or anything that is like personal or something, but it's just a professional discipline. As a group, people thought that this can never work, but over time it evolved and it worked. The second aspect I learned is, it's all which I think most of us know, is that deep learning is inspired by the neurology, the biological aspects, how the nerves work, those things. And that was also quite interesting, how you can take that and develop algorithms based on that. So deep learning is really fascinating, and obviously that's a huge thing nowadays. So yeah, to get a more like a sense of how these things evolved, it's good to read that book, The Deep Learning Revolution. It's not necessary for learning it technically, but I always find it fascinating to get the big picture of things, and that will help you work on this business problems. So that was a little bit of digression, but coming back to our topic, starting with the supervised learning, as I already mentioned, you have some training examples, which is basically what we call in other disciplines, like in economics or statistics, it's just a data set full of explanatory variables. In here we the whole data set from the past, which we call as training. Example in the machine learning terminology. So you have input features, which is what we call in economics and other fields as maybe explanatory variables or independent variables or exogenous variables. And then you have the target output. So you also have let's say that you are predicting the income of a household, and you have many variables that influence income. So you have the income, and you also have the different the independent variables or explanatory variables. So that is a training example. You know what output is targeted, and you also know what are the different features. So the goal is to predict the outputs from only the features. So as you increase the features, maybe the prediction capacity can increase, but then you're limited by how much features can you add. So there is always going to be this what we call in economics as omitted variable bias. If you don't have certain features that are important, you don't have data on them, that is going to affect your prediction capabilities. So for classification, the set of targets is that's basically, if the set of targets is finite, basically you have a set of categories. Then that is classification. So you say, okay, rich, poor, or rural rich, rural poor, and so on. Regression is like the set of targets if they're infinite. So it can be a continuous variable. Then it is regression. So classification and regression, that's the distinction. So now I just want to talk very briefly about development to give you an idea how much these are impactful. So in terms of the healthcare application, so UC San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco, I think around a couple of years ago, 2018 November, they published an article where they looked at the PET scan of brain, and they were able to diagnose the Alzheimer's disease pretty early. And as many of us know, Alzheimer's disease, once it starts, it's very difficult to have any cure or recover from it. But then if you can diagnose it pretty early, there could be even life-saving approaches to fix it. So just to give a perspective, it's like you can diagnose like 6 years before the usual clinical diagnosis. And yes, and accuracy is pretty high, 90 to 98%. So people who are interested, you can search this. I'll try to find the exact reference, but you can just search based on this. The unsupervised learning is as I mentioned before, it's more like clustering the different set of observations based on some kind of similarity. So here it is, like this example is about documents. You can say that these documents are all about a particular category, and that category is based on some kind of similarity. It's not like intelligently imposed on the system like we do in the supervised learning, but it is all done organically by the ML system. So typically use a distance metric, how each observation is different from the other. So here the method that you're using is crucial, and it basically when it comes to application of machine learning, you have to think about which kind of learning would be suitable. I somehow by default I prefer this unsupervised learning over supervised learning, because it gives us a lot of I actually like to see some kind of objective way of classifying things from the data. Like I told you earlier before, like why to tell the data or the model that this is a threshold? Why doesn't the model decide it for itself? I'll give some example on this, when I come to some of our cases. So now, okay, so reinforcement learning is also quite fascinating. So there, how can you have some kind of reward for being more accurate? So like if the agent or the observation that is dependent on a behavior of an agent, if they are incentivized to do something, there is some reward for that. How can that improve the prediction? So this thing called Google DeepMind. So they actually developed this games, human level Atari game. Only based on the pixels on the screen, they were able to develop the whole game player, which is almost like human level. So basically, that player that is developed by the system that can act based on this reward. So like you can think of chess, playing chess with a computer, right? So there also it's like that. So if you do this, you're going to get more rewards. If you're doing this, you're going to get less reward. And that way you can also define the level of difficulty of the games. So this is one example. And this AlphaGo is a computer program that actually convincingly bet a world champion at Go. So there are things in chess also. We've seen things like that. So that is reinforcement learning. So where you have some incentives to come up with better performance, rewarding better performance. So that is reinforcement learning. So deep learning is based on neural networks. There are many hidden layers, layers and layers of data involved. So here you have the stochastic gradient descent and the parallel, and it is done parallel using this GPUs. Here there are many examples for deep learning, and that is how we see a lot of developments in the recent past, which are quite fascinating and interesting. So neural machine translation by Google. So we are able to, all this Google Translate is a result of deep learning. In Facebook, you can have chatbots that can chat with you and respond. That's also an example. And this is something I really got so excited when I first saw the Google Smart Reply. And the first thing I remember was like and that's something that I used to do so regularly, and even now I do, where I compose an email to someone saying that I attach something to the file, and I totally forget about the attachment. And this, if you look at my emails some maybe 7-8 years ago, before this feature came, you would see a lot of things, a lot of emails where I'll say, the person the recipient of my email would say the attachment is missing. Then I say, oops, I'm sorry, here's the attachment. So that whole thing is gone now. Like I'll never do that mistake, because I say attach and Google will give me a warning. You're saying that you're attaching something, but you don't see that here. I was so excited about that, but of course that's a norm now. And another sense of excitement was with the automatic reply. In fact, when I in the recent past, LinkedIn, whenever I see somebody's birthday or somebody's new job or something, I just get the notification. I click on it, and you directly get the message. And the further messages are also pretty reactive. Whatever they say, thank you, then you get you're welcome, it's my pleasure, how are you? It keeps coming in a flow. So that's all coming from deep learning. Then you have like also raw audio, how to it was Google Wave Net, which is about raw audio, some sources. In fact, I was very excited recently. Some app which could, you can actually sing a tune. You may not even know the the lyrics or anything. You just sing a tune, and then the algorithm would search for all kinds of songs and music that is available, and come up with what song, what was that. I was even able to find some kind of old Bollywood songs or things like that. So it's quite exciting. So it's quite advanced. The other thing is lip reading. Again, Google DeepMind did something on this with Oxford University, and all of us are now very familiar with the deep fake. How President Obama was made to talk something that President Trump would do usually in his own style, and people can easily misinterpret that. Okay, this is reality. So, and this is quite dangerous. It can lead to a lot of confusion. But yes, this is already a norm now. So all these are happening through machine learning. So now I think I have a few more minutes where I'll talk about some of our experiences. So in today's world, with COVID and all the uncertainties that you're facing, the major problem is how do you tackle uncertainty within machine learning setting. A year ago, last year, I was in a panel where with the Association for Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, where we discussed about this topic as a group. I and some other economists, we had a discussion on how to tackle this, like machine learning and uncertainty. And I also did another industry forum organized by Sapient, where they were also interested in this, because when COVID started, this became like a big topic. Okay, your machine learning model is going to perform under normal conditions with a given set of features in the past. What about uncertainty? And that became like a huge question. A lot of data scientists, machine learning people started asking, and this actually brings me back to the original question that I asked, or point that I mentioned in my first slide, which is about the trade-off between data analytics, data science, and complete dependence on data and complete dependence on logic or economic structure or some engineering, scientific, structural thinking. So what I thought would be a way to address this is to combine the uncertainties coming from health situation. There are a lot of models that predict various outcomes in terms of how long the pandemic is going to be there and so on, how severe it's going to be. And there are economic scenario analysis where you can think about how stringent the governments are going to be, what is going to be the vaccination rate, all kinds of different scenarios. So the scenarios, what they do is, obviously it's extremely difficult to tackle all the uncertainties, but at least we can classify the future into optimistic and pessimistic, and a range of scenarios between the two extremes. And then you have your machine learning model, and combine that with all these changes depending on different scenarios. So the features are going to evolve in different ways in these different scenarios, and then accordingly your forecast is going to change for the future. So that is one approach that we came up with, and that we were able to do for a few clients. One was a major Indian client which is into transportation finance. So what we did was, from our economic scenario analysis, we were able to see and I'll show briefly this economic model that we use for these things. So we identified what are the different industries which require transportation, and how their lockdowns, their shutdown or reduced operation would impact the transportation related to those sectors. And based on that, we could tell this company, the finance company, as to how can they make decisions on the loan disbursements to different types of transportation. So, for example, we from our economic model, we found that in all scenarios, trade is going to be disrupted, international trade, right? And that is kind of also common sense because international movement of goods have been highly restricted. Now we can say from that the transportation agents, the people who are involved in the transportation industry, who are involved in transporting goods to and from the harbors, the international trade hubs, they are going to be majorly affected. So if they are going to seek loans because they are facing uncertainty and they want to invest or not invest, but they're just earning some losses, they need some money to for some physical working capital or whatever, then the finance company has to be careful, because there is no foreseeable future in the next few months or maybe 1 or 2 years for them to come back to full swing. So unless they are willing to change to some other sectors that are apparently more hopeful, it's not a good idea to give them loans. And that decision was made by the finance company. We were able to use this algorithm to come up with a bunch of sectors at a relatively macro level, and then combine that with their customer data profile, customer in the sense the loan applications, and they were able to make decisions on which ones to go. We came with some kind of score where they can say, okay, this is the threshold that we want to have. If the score is high enough, we'll give them the loans, otherwise we won't. And we'll ask the usual questions. So that is one example of how to tackle uncertainty. Now, I wouldn't say tackle, but how to try and factor in some kind of uncertainty. I mean, even this is not foolproof. We can do whatever we want, but with the pandemic, one experience I got with all these different scenarios that we did was that we were actually not able to even the most pessimistic scenario that we got in many cases ended up being optimistic than the actual thing that turned out to be. So it's extremely difficult to understand the seriousness of this issue, particularly in the early stages. Nowadays, whatever we predict is like pessimistic is actually pessimistic, because we have seen the worst happen and we get ready for the worst. So nowadays it's okay, but imagine like a year ago, like in January, February, March, even in March, things were not that easy to predict. So that is the first thing. The second thing is about a totally different topic, about fundraising. So we worked with an Ivy League university here and their their hospital. They were involved in fundraising for their research, not only research but also for free treatment for poorer people and so on. So they had a pretty detailed information on donors. I was very surprised that the data was so rich, and they never put it to work to make any decisions. They were just collecting the data and didn't know what to do. So we got in touch with them in the right time when they were thinking that we should do something about it, and we got the data. They gave us the data, and the reason I'm not mentioning their name is it was a confidential project. So they gave the data, and they wanted to understand how two things. One thing is if it's like a credit card decision making. All the credit card companies, they have data of people who have got the credit cards, and then you make decisions on who you see their behavior, and then if a particular person, a new person is applying for credit card, you look at all their behavioral aspects, their background, their demographic aspects and so on, and then you put it in the system, it would say whether it will give them some credit score, and using the credit score, you decide to give the credit card or not. In the same way, we wanted to develop like a donor score. If a potential they get contact of a new person, typically the way they get contact is they don't do like random soliciting, because as I told you, it's a very reputed institution. But they go with people who have been inpatients, people who have been outpatients, people who have some connection with the hospital, not anybody. And they solicit them, they send them like a letter, can you please contribute, or they may do a phone call, or they may invite them for some event, all these things. And that would help them contribute, like nudge them to contribute basically. So we wanted to first understand how that particular donor is. So is it worthwhile contacting them? So that is the first thing. The second strategy was at a high level, at a macro, not macro, but high level, I would say. It's not about macroeconomics, but in that, in their data, using their data, they wanted to understand, okay, today we are collecting like $80 million donations. In a year, our target is like 100 million or 120 million. How do we reach there? So there are all these examples I gave you, calling a potential donor, sending them a mail, inviting them to events and so on, and many strategies like that. So now we can actually, using machine learning, taking these as features, we can actually say which ones are going to work more than the others at a high level. So you can say that, okay, this like invitation to an event is more effective, calling them is more effective, or sending them a mail is more effective. So we can see the relative contributions of these to the donations. And based on that, we were able to come up with some ideas at a high level also. Okay, if you focus more on sending invitations, you're going to reach this 100 million pretty soon. How much more you have to increase that effort to reach that kind of goal. So we also did that, both at the high level and also at the donor level. We did both, and they were able to make use of these systems to go forward. So that is second example. And here we did a wide range of classification, clustering, and supervised learning, unsupervised learning, decision tree analysis. So we did a lot of these things to come up with forecasts and also explain. But then here is where I was telling earlier that I used both the machine learning methods and some standard economic models like panel data models and simultaneous equation systems to basically understand the behavior. So I used the economic models to understand the actual behavior, and the machine learning models to come up with precise, accurate forecasting. So when we did the forecasting, when we told that this is what is happening, this is the most effective method, and so on, the client would ask us, okay, how do you explain this? We thought this was the other way around. How do you explain this? Then we went to our economic model to explain, okay, this is why we got these results. So it was very fascinating to look at both the predictability and explainability at the same time. And one would think that this is all highly theoretical discussion, but it is so practically powerful and useful. Because actually, once you are able to explain something that looks like a black box inference, once you are able to explain the behavioral aspects of that, they get convinced. I mean, first of all, even we get convinced. First of all, I was pretty blank when I looked at the prediction, so doesn't make any sense. But when we did the economic modeling and economic theoretical analysis, we were able to say, okay, this is how this is happening. There are so many things that can happen in the positive direction and negative direction, and what happens is somewhere in between. In some context, in a context, the effect is positive. In another context, the effect is negative, and we know the theoretical explanation of both of them. So that is the second aspect. The third aspect, which is like a pretty detailed proposal that we have developed, and we haven't yet implemented that, but it's about mental health. So we are thinking of developing like an app which can actually it can be like part of your iWatch or your phone or whatever. If it is iWatch, then it can actually check your pulse and your bodily symptoms, and it can suggest that you're probably going through something, some kind of depression, or you have early signs of some major mental health problem or something. So the diagnosis can happen, and even some initial treatment. It can even give you some tips. What can work if you have a bad day today. How do you you do some yoga, do some meditation. Even now, iWatch does a little bit of inhale and exhale thing. Like it gives you a nudge to do that. Those kind of things. But it can be more customized depending on your situation. So what I mean by past data is that there is a lot of data available on what are the symptoms, what are the treatment methods for different types of mental health problems. And you can make use of that and develop a system like a machine learning algorithm to then work to your particular situation. Okay, this is all the data I got, all the knowledge I got from the world, from the academic literature, medical literature, and so on. And now I see your body, and based on your body, I can suggest something. So this is something that we have been working on. We proposed to some organizations; they're interested. So this is also like a decision-making thing at a healthcare level. To basically have an early diagnosis, early treatment. This is one thing that is kind of something we're working on. So another thing we did a little bit of work was recommendation systems. So when you buy something on Amazon, it's going to recommend that, okay, you buy this, so you may also buy this. So here, one frustration that I have as a user is that sometimes these recommendations are crazy. Like just because I bought like a pencil, it will say that I'm let's say that I'm a very frugal buyer, and I just buy a pencil that is like $1 worth or something, and then the recommendation would say probably like just because somebody else who may be like a collector of pencils, like exotic pencils. Somebody who bought this $1 pencil might have also bought some like $1 million pencil. I mean, exaggerating, like $100 pencil or something, like a pretty expensive one. And I may get the same recommendation because for some reason that person's demography and my demography matched, and he bought a pencil. I also bought a pencil, so I bought a $1 pencil, so I get a $100 pencil as my recommendation. So I get frustrated. Why is this coming up? Then I thought that, okay, what is missing in this? The whole thing is about the basic concept of elasticity that we have in economics. So that person the person who buys that $100 pencil may have a greater preference for quality, and I mean, he would pay anything for a high quality. He or she wouldn't mind paying a lot of money if the perceived quality is high or standard is high, and but they don't have very high elasticity when it comes to price. So we define this price elasticity and quality elasticity. We use the it was like a research paper. We used the Netflix data. Netflix has this movie ratings data, which is freely available. It was like a challenge a while ago. So we use the data to understand the price elasticity and rating elasticity. How would a given user respond to the price of a movie? Based on that, they may decide to go buy a particular movie. And how would they respond to the ratings of a movie? So the quality responsiveness and the price responsiveness of a particular user. Then based on that, you can have the usual algorithms that they use, like vector space methods and so on, to come up with a short list. And in that short list, you'll have this things like $100 pencil. They can be eliminated by applying the elasticities. You have estimated the elasticities. You apply those elasticities on the user, and for that particular new recommendation, and then you'll see whether based on like the delta increase in price, like from $1 they're going to $100. So that is like, let's say the average price of a pencil that is bought by the user is like $1, and the proposed price is like $100. So the delta is like $99. So this $99 increase in price would mean how much reduction in demand by the user. If $99 price increase happens, the user may actually reduce the demand by 100%. The user will not even buy. So then that should be eliminated. That shortlisted item should be eliminated. So basically, we use economics, this elasticity concept, as a shortlister, as a fine tuner. You already have the shortlist using the vector space algorithms. That is a usual way of doing recommendation systems. Then you fine tune that using the elasticities. How much that person is willing to pay in terms of quality and in terms of price. Like what is their usual range? What is the range that you're proposing? And how would their demand be depending on the new quality and new price that you're shortlisting. So that's a system that we developed, which it's more like a research that we did, but we get quite excited about it, but it's not yet. We think it can have some practical implications. It can reduce a lot of this nuisance that when you see this recommendation system. So that is one thing. Another thing that it's a research paper we did was looking at the pattern mining. How, like for example, if you're going to a shop and you're buying milk and yogurt, then you also may potentially buy butter. So milk, curd, and butter is like a combination. Now over time, this can actually change. People who buy milk and curd, they may buy cheese instead of butter. So that is like a pattern change mining. So it's not only machine learning, but more like how to mine the changes in patterns, and that can help making pricing decisions, like how these purchase patterns are changing, and accordingly you can decide on the pricing decisions. So pricing decisions, to make them, you can, and if you go to like Amazon or many of these companies, they have economists who work on this combination of machine learning and economic methods to come up with the pricing. So we did a paper on this pattern change mining. Then the last one that I'll show a little bit, some example, like a couple of slides I'll show you, and that is about using machine learning for forecasting, considering the economic and business scenarios. So we recently did kind of a pilot model for palm oil analysis. So I'll show that in a moment. And we also have been doing some work on like tweet analytics. What do the CEOs tweet? Look at that, do some machine learning, impose some algorithm there to understand how to take that into forecasting. How do you take into account the sentiments when you do macroeconomic forecasting? So this is I will show it very quickly, but to give you an idea of an economic model. So this is like a rich economic model, which can be used for simulation, scenario-based simulations. So let's say that the whole economy can be thought of like this. There is a consumer, they buy products from industry, they provide their labor and capital to the companies. These are the producers who consume all these factors. They sell the products to the consumers. Then the savings are taken into a bank and they're converted into investment that again go to the producers. Then there is also the government, which provides subsidies to consumer and extracts taxes from them. And then you have them also, public procurement also happens. They buy from the producers. And there is also the rest of the world where exports and imports happen. So this kind of a framework, this is like a system of equations. There is a system of block of equations about products, another block of equations about factors, consumers. Each of these agents, there is a block of equations. So there are like thousands of equations. In this system, you have what is happening to imports, exports, production, and so on. Now we take this and we have multiple scenarios. We have here also we have exogenous variables, we have endogenous variables, and then we can look at what happens to the change in technologies or tariffs, taxes, and so on. So, of course, here we have multiple industries, multiple sectors. You can actually capture the interaction between different sectors. So this is the kind of framework we use for the transportation finance, the first example I gave here. The very first example, we used it for this, and we also used it for this palm oil prices, which is what I'm going to show. So for the palm oil prices, we had a pretty detailed machine learning model. I'm not getting into the details of the machine learning model, but I'm coming up with this particular example, how to take into account some shocks. So we looked at a couple of shocks. So the major problem with commodity like palm oil is that you have so many policies that are happening that can affect the prices. So the machine learning model cannot capture all these policy changes unless you have some guidance. You have to give it some guidance. So the guidance, what we thought, the way to give the guidance would be to look at some recent developments. We look at some real world developments. So one thing is like the Indonesian policymakers, they wanted to restrict the palm oil exports. So they increased the export tax from $35 per ton to $55 per ton. That was one thing. And the second thing was a biodiesel mandate. So Indonesia is a major producer of palm oil, and they said we are going to use palm oil blending in the biodiesel from 30% to 40%. So increase the mandate. So these two are the scenarios. So from this, what we inferred was, okay, because of the increase in export taxes, the exports will become more expensive and less competitive. And then that means that, so Indonesia and Malaysia are two major palm oil producers. So if Indonesia's exports fall, then Malaysia's production may increase. Now, because of the mandate, biodiesel mandate, there's going to be more use of more need for palm oil in Indonesia because they're going to be used for blending. That means the production of palm oil should also increase. So now what we did was, in the previous slide, I showed you this model. So in this equilibrium model, what is called as computable general equilibrium model, we imposed these two as two different scenarios, or if I remember correctly, we introduced them together in a single scenario. So Indonesia increases the export taxes, and Indonesia increases the biodiesel mandate. We do these two things, and then we get this series of changes. So first, the Indonesia's export prices increase by, all these are percentage changes. They increase by some X%. So the Indonesia's export volumes fall by so much because their prices are increasing, and Indonesia's production increases by so much. So you can see that this is all coming from, like the pink ones are from the export taxes, and the blue ones are from the biodiesel mandates. So the biodiesel mandates are going to have a positive impact on production, whereas the export taxes are going to reduce the production because they're going to reduce the exports, which are major part of production. So the net effect is still positive. Mandate is going to increase the production of palm oil in Indonesia. But what is happening is Indonesia is going to consume a lot of domestic palm oil, and that is why the exports are falling. I mean, exports are falling even when you increase the domestic production. And then coming to other countries, so what happens to India? So India's import prices would increase because India depends a lot on Indonesian palm oil. So the India's imports are also falling because their prices are increasing. And but then India also has been able to increase its production, and Malaysia also increases its production in both cases. And but the Malaysia's export volume also increases in the first case because it's going to substitute the Indonesian exports, and in the second case it will fall a little bit. So my apologies for getting into some of these details, but this is just to give you an example of how various aspects that may not be necessarily captured in a standard machine learning setting, this can be captured from another specialist model, like a domain-specific model, in this case, economic policy model, which can capture all this impact. This is not like all these are happening simultaneously, but we can actually go through a logical, thought process. So this is how things are affecting. Now what we did was, we basically say that this equilibrium, this is like moving from one equilibrium to another, and our machine learning model has a 90 days forecast period. So for the 90 days, we said that this we use the effect that we got from here. So 1.5% increase in prices, that is this, and 2.64% from this. This we got from our equilibrium model. Then you feed that into the features that you have in the machine learning model, and then we come up with these possible scenarios. So another work we have been doing is to take this, multi-layer database. You have the national, global level data sets. You have also provincial and industry level data sets. And then this is the kind of modeling framework that I talked about. Then for a particular setting, for a particular policy strategy question, we can look at the reinforcement learning kind of approach, where we can increase the rewards for getting better forecasts, and you can keep reinforcing it. You go here, you use the economic model to predict something, then you enter the entire forecast for a particular policy strategy into the machine learning reinforcement learning world, and then you feed that back into the economic model, and then you keep doing this kind of feedback mechanism. So that is something we have been working on. Those are the aspects that I wanted to discuss today. So that's pretty much where I end. Any questions, thoughts?
So we have a few more minutes. So the floor is open if anyone from the audience wants to ask questions.
Can I ask one question? Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask whether this palm oil thing, there was a fight between India and Malaysia regarding some years back. So did you consider that also?
Actually, that is something we have been working on now, actually. So we are also developing. So this one was like a quick pilot analysis we did. So this whole purpose of this thing I mentioned was to help a particular client to, just to give them an idea as to how we can combine these different models to, take into account some realities. But like you said, we have been also further working on this. So we are also looking into in the Indian context, there are some new policies that like increasing import tariffs on palm oil and and incentivizing the domestic market to produce substitutes for palm oil, more vegetable oil, and so on. We are looking into that. We are also actually thinking of using some combination of machine learning and economics to even predict some policies, which is actually very risky and difficult because policies they happen because of the features are so many features. When you think about policies, how to predict policies, but we are trying to do that a little bit because in this context the policies have been relatively more on the expected lines. Not by expected, I don't mean like these are the correct policies, but we know the behavior of the government. This is how the government would go. So that is something that we are working on. But what you said, the dispute and the discussion going on in this area, we are capturing that, not in this analysis that I showed you here, but we are looking into it separately. But yes, that's a great question, and it's important to think along these lines. So here we only focused on these aspects, what is happening to Indonesia alone, independently. But if you really want to dig deeper and do this in a very exhaustive way, like we just showed these two policies here, export tax and biodiesel, but there could be like 10 other things here. We could have 10 other things, and you could have taken those inputs into the machine learning model and got like 10 different forecasts. And you could say that that's the you could either say that you can take the minimum and maximum, say this is a range, or you can keep all the 10 forecasts and say that, okay, all these are, potential scenarios. We don't know which would be which would happen in reality, and what combination would happen in reality. We don't know. You can just say that, and then the user, the decision maker, we can actually develop like an interface where the decision maker can say, okay, this is the scenario that I think will happen, and that scenario will be a combination of all these, linear or non-linear combination of all these things that we have done. What we have done is we have thought about 10, 20 different scenarios that can happen independently. Now the policymaker can say, okay, what if they happen together? And there should be some way to combine them, and then the visualization or whatever, the data system should tell them this is what would happen. So that is another thing that is actually part of what we are developing here. So we want that to happen from a user side, but your example is spot on in that. Those are the kind of examples we're thinking of.
Sir, one more thing, sir. You talked about the tweets and the CEO. So from where can we get this data? If I also want to work on like the CFO tweet or something and investor sentiment, something like that.
So can you refine your question a little bit, or do you mean to say like okay, if the CEO has to make decision, they, of course, we have to handhold them in terms of data, right? They of course they'll have the access to the best data. If they want anything, they can get it, but it's not in the best interest of their time, given their busy schedule doing many things, to do all this by themselves. So our system, whatever we are doing, should facilitate that as much as possible. So all the data collection is all part of our system. And what the decision maker has to do is, if they have further judgment, because at the end of the day, even all these scenarios that we do, there is some judgment involved, and we do some judgment as experts. But CEOs, all the big decision makers, they'll have their own judgments based on their gut instinct, their brilliant thinking of what is happening. It's always like what an expert thinks need not be what a decision maker thinks. So that's why we have to give them some way. It's more attractive to give them some freedom to modify our analysis. So we say that this is the analysis that we did based on our expert ideas, inputs. And if you want to make a decision based on this, maybe they're not using more, like they're not going to use more data sets, because all the data sets are taken into account here. But there is going to be some, like the CEO is going to be in the company of policymakers and other CEOs, where they may have some internal information that we don't have and they cannot even share with us. And those kind of information, that information is going to be more qualitative. They know that, okay, this scenario, I know that the government is not going to increase the export tax with 35 from 35 to 55, because I just had a phone call with the minister and he said he's not going to do that. Right? That information you and I will not have, but the CEO would have, and he or she can make that inference. I mean, they can do some, for example, in this like 35 to 55, he or she would know that it's 35 to 45, not 55. Then he can either ask me to redo the analysis, saying that, okay, don't go to 55, go to 45. Or he can just do it, like if I give him some kind of proportionality, say if you just introduce this fraction, then that will adjust all your forecasts. We have already done all these different scenarios. We have done 45, we have done 40, we have done all these scenarios, and now you can just click the switch. If you say, okay, instead of 55, move it to 45, then it shows all the results for that. So that is another approach. So we have done both these approaches in different contexts. We would literally the decision maker would ask me to do, why don't you think of this scenario? Or the decision maker would say, no, I won't tell you any scenarios, just do a bunch of scenarios based on this. Like, this is coming, but why don't you also think about something lower, higher than that, a few different scenarios, and then he can pick and choose, okay, this is what will happen. So did I answer your question, or did you mean to ask something else?
It was good. Yeah, I understood. I'm also working on this kind of thing. So just for a query. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Great. Yeah, please reach out to me. It will be good to discuss what you're doing as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I will.
Any other questions for Badri?
Sir, one more question, sir. Sir, hello.
Yeah, please go
Sir,
ahead.
I was seeing that paper, sir, exchange rate, productivity, and exports. The case of Indian textile sector. So, if I wanted to know, like, if I have downloaded the full paper, so how can if we want to continue the study, or we have to put some macroeconomic indicators and compare India and Bangladesh textile sector. So, if you can suggest something.
So, sorry. Yeah, that's a. I'm very happy that you mentioned that. It's a very old paper I did almost when I began my career, I think. But I think a lot of it is relevant to some extent today, because mostly if you talk to the exporters, practically, because I came from that point of view. When before my PhD, I was in the industry. And mostly the industry people, the exporters, they would blame the central bank. They would say the exchange rate is, it's appreciating too much. It has to depreciate. They have to, because if it depreciates, then we'll get better price. Like for the same rupees, we get the same dollars that we get will mean more in rupees, right? So that is the thing. And in that paper, what I tried to find was, is it really true? Is exchange rate really the thing that drives the exports, or is it like productivity and other real aspects? And I think, if I remember correctly, our results indicated that productivity is more important, and particularly in the long term, the co-integration existed between, I think, productivity and exports. Exchange rate was important in the short term, but not in the long term. Something like that. In the context of Bangladesh and India, the thing is very different. Recently I went to Bangladesh to train them on some of the trade policy aspects, and there, if you talk about exports, it is apparel exports, nothing else actually. It's like 80-90% of their exports is apparel and textile. So they are a specialized economy, completely into this. Their industry is all about this. So that's a big difference. And the second thing is, so because of that focus, despite being a small country, they're really leaders in this area. That is one aspect. And for India, it has, over time, it has become like a diminished sector. It is still an important sector. Textile and apparel is still an important sector, but it's diminished its importance and stature over time. The second aspect is that Bangladesh has had this access as an LDC, least developed country. They've got preferential access to many developed markets like EU, US, and so on, which India doesn't have that thing. And even the little GSP that we had is gone with the US. So that is another thing which we cannot even compete. But the thing is, Bangladesh is also losing that status. They are graduating out of LDC, as we have seen in the recent past. Some news that say that Bangladesh's per capita GDP is growing faster than India's. So their economic performance is getting better. So they're graduating out of LDC. So they're going to lose all these special access, also the duty-free access and so on. So that with that thing happening, Bangladesh would become less of a competitor in the future. But then India itself is moving away from textile and apparel. They're getting into other industries. So there are a lot of factors involved here. So if you really want to work on this, I think you have to take into consideration the competitors. Who are the other upcoming competitors? Okay, Bangladesh is one, but you should also think of other competitors that may come in the future. Some of the African countries, Central Asian countries, which are rich in the resources. Many of them have cotton, for example. They can, like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, these kind of countries. And some of the African countries like Nigeria, Ghana. I think these are the ones to look for. In terms of using like here we are if you are interested more in the relationships, how one affects another and so on, then some economic modeling approach would be better. But if your interest is to help an exporter to identify, who are your competitors, how are you going to, which markets are you going to get more traction in the future. So for that, in my opinion, it's good to use a combination of machine learning, because you're going to do some forecasting, which is really useful for them, and some economic analysis and modeling, because you want to explain the stories, like why this country is going to demand more, why this country is going to demand less.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
So we have time for one more question. So Professor Mukherjee, you had a question?
I have a comment, Badri. Your this whole approach is fascinating. I really like it. How you are complementing and combining the wisdom from machine learning to the wisdom of economic modeling. It's philosophically speaking, it's basically you're doing you are showing the complementarity between parametric and non-parametrics, because machine learning is data driven, non-parametric, right? Econometrically, statistically speaking. And then parametric approaches, they always have a pattern, like let's say the model is quadratic. This is the reason the model should be quadratic. Non-parametric shows it is quadratic, or some other kind of thing, mixture model, etc. And then you can explain it through parametrics. So it's not separate. There was this whole this complementarity that they're exploring these days in econometrics between non-parametric and parametric. Non-parametric being, say, machine learning, and that is what you're doing with economics. It's a really fascinating approach. Like, you get data-driven thing from machine learning, you are explaining it through economic models. So I really like it. It's wonderfully useful. That's.
Thank you so much, Devashri.
She probably got disconnected.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Devashri, and this is. In fact, in coming back to economics that she mentioned, like if you think about production function, for example, if you want to think about what is the best way to fit a particular data to, like for an industry, what is the best production function that fits in? You can have, there are many things like Cobb-Douglas, translog, and many other types of production functions. Of course, we can say from a theoretical point of view that this is the most flexible production function form. You start with that and then come to special cases. But in reality, different industries may actually have different functional forms, and the reality can be even more flexible than the most flexible form that is available in the literature. So in that context, it's ideal to leave it to non-parametrics, or like machine learning kind of approach, where you just let the data decide what is the best solution. Devashri, I was just thanking you for that comment and giving you the example of production function. So when you have a production function, we always come up with a parametric. We cannot hear you.
On my end. Yeah.
No. So basically, I was just saying that I was thanking you, and it's a great point. And I was giving the example of production function in economics, where we typically say we start with a particular functional form assumption. We say that this is a transfer function or Cobb-Douglas, and then we go ahead, and it did not be the case. And we also think that, for example, translog is the most flexible form, or maybe we're finding some more flexible forms. But in reality, if you go use non-parametric methods, you can actually come up with the actual functional form. Why do you want to say more flexible, less flexible? So thanks for that point. Thanks.
Exactly. That's Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Badri, for such a wonderful talk. And a warm welcome and thank you to all the participants for joining us over these 2 days and making this workshop a success. As a conclusion, so we would like to ask Professor Joydeep Datta. He's the coordinator of the Center for Mathematical and Computational Economics, to say a few words and conclude these 2 days of talks.
Thank you, Dipavati. I guess I should start by saying that I am the odd one out here. I am the one here who doesn't have any knowledge about economics. I am a mathematician by training and optimizer by specialization. Anyway, Badri, are you from Seattle, right?
Yes, Doctor. I'm from Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a place where very great optimization is done. And so it was lovely on these 2 days. This was the first attempt by CMCE to do such a kind of program. Our center, this center which I am on deputation from IIT Kanpur till December. So in this center it started with, essentially this was an idea which I and Shoptarshi, I'm sure he must be here among the audience, had discussed quite a bit, and then we got a chance to IIT Jodhpur, and so it was a pandemic time, none of us could go actually out of India, so it was thought that this idea can be pushed in, can be taken forward here. And to be very precise, that in the AID school, this Artificial Intelligence Data Science School in Jodhpur, we are probably the only really functioning department, functioning research center basically. So this is not really a department; it's less than a department. Department is something bigger. It's a very focused research center, which is good. So I enjoyed all the talks. Obviously, I would say that the most comfortable talk was Shoptarshi's, because he started with a sentence that let X be a topological space, which that would make any mathematician happy. Whatever you are talking about, you say that there's a topological space. So there was Shoptarshi's talk, which I could understand something, and also Umang's talk was very nice on fair division. Professor Narahari gave a excellent introduction to machine learning and its link with mechanism design, and he gave a very nice introduction to mechanism design. And Badri's talk was interesting, but I would salute such people who can go in 3-4 domains at the same time and straddle all those domains. It's very difficult for me to think that I could ever straddle the 2-3 domains together. So it was very interesting, and I thank all of you for participating in, and hope that CMC through these kind of conferences would build up connections. And I would request people like Badri and Professor Mukherjee here to build up connections with our center so that it can progress, because this will be taken forward by young people, not people who like us who has crossed the 50th mark. So that's I guess is a very important thing. We have very young people, very active people, which is a very, very good idea. So anyway, thank you, and I give the baton back to Dipavati.
So once again, thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed these 2 days of talks that we put together for you. And we look forward to seeing you all again at such future events. So with that, we can conclude these 2 days of workshop. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.